Today, we reveal 15 Stoic rules to master your mind.
Pressure rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time it enters quietly, disguised as a look, a comment, a delay, a misunderstanding. It arrives in ordinary moments when we believe we are in control. And it is in those moments, not in great crises, that character is revealed. Not by what we say, but by what we resist saying. Not by what we do, but by what we refuse to do. You have felt this before. A surge in the chest, a tightening of the jaw, the impulse to respond immediately, to defend, to correct, to strike back with words or actions that promise relief but deliver regret. The world presses, and the mind rushes to meet it. Most people live there, trapped in that instant between stimulus and reaction, never questioning it, never mastering it. They call this being alive. It is not. It is being governed. The strength of not reacting is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not indifference. It is the most demanding discipline a person can practice. To pause when provoked requires more effort than to explode. To remain silent when misunderstood demands more courage than to shout. Reaction is easy. Control is rare. When you react, you hand authority over your inner state to whatever happens to be in front of you. A careless remark, an unfair criticism, a moment of disrespect, suddenly your peace depends on the behavior of others. You become movable, adjustable, fragile. This is not freedom. It is dependency. Consider how often your day is shaped by small disturbances, a message that arrives late, a plan that changes without warning, someone who fails to meet your expectations. Each one seems insignificant on its own, yet together they drain clarity and scatter attention. The mind becomes restless, always leaning forward, always bracing for the next irritation. Over time, this state feels normal, but normal does not mean healthy. The Stoic does not seek to eliminate pressure. Pressure is part of life, as unavoidable as weather. What can be shaped is the response to it, or more precisely, the choice not to respond immediately. Between what happens and what you do, there is a narrow space. Most people never notice it. The disciplined mind lives there. In that space, something remarkable occurs. Emotion still arises: anger, fear, frustration, but it no longer commands. It becomes information rather than instruction. You observe it without obeying it. This is not suppression. Suppression hides emotion until it hardens. Observation allows it to pass without leaving scars. Think of a fire. If you panic and throw anything at it, you may spread it further. If you step back, assess, and act deliberately, you contain it. Emotions are no different. Immediate reaction feeds them. Calm attention starves them. Many believe they must express everything they feel to remain authentic. This is a misunderstanding of authenticity. Authenticity is not impulse. It is alignment with principle. A person who reacts to every emotion is not being true to themselves. They are being ruled by their least examined instincts. The practice of not reacting begins with humility. You must accept that your first interpretation of events is often incomplete, that your initial emotion, while real, is not always accurate, that the mind under pressure seeks certainty even when none exists. To pause is to admit you may not yet see clearly. This humility is uncomfortable. It denies the ego its immediate satisfaction. It withholds the relief of being right, of being heard, of being dominant in the moment. But what it offers instead is far greater consistency of character. Over time, people learn that you are not easily shaken, that your words are measured, that your presence is steady. This quiet reputation carries more weight than any argument won in anger. There is also a private reward one few speak about. When you stop reacting, you recover time, not hours or days, but moments, small fragments of attention that would otherwise be lost to regret, rumination, and self-justification. These moments accumulate. They become clarity, they become focus, they become peace that does not depend on external order. The mind trained to pause begins to recognize patterns. You notice which situations reliably provoke you. You see how often the same triggers appear, wearing different faces. This awareness weakens them. What is seen clearly loses its power to surprise. This is where strength quietly forms, not in grand gestures, but in repeated restraint. Each time you choose silence over impulse, you reinforce a deeper authority within yourself. Each time you delay reaction, you remind the mind that it serves something higher than comfort. This lecture is not about becoming unfeeling. It is about becoming ungovernable. Calm under pressure is not the absence of stress. It is the refusal to let stress dictate behavior. The rules that follow are not commandments imposed from outside. They are observations earned through attention, through failure, through discipline. We begin here with the simplest and most demanding act: to notice the moment before reaction, and to stay there just long enough to choose who you will be. Once you begin to notice that moment before reaction, you also begin to notice how rarely it was yours before. The body moved, the voice rose, the message was sent, the decision was made, and only afterward did awareness arrive. Most regret is born this way, not from malice, but from speed. We live as if urgency itself were a virtue. It is not. It is often a disguise for fear. Pressure creates the illusion that something must be done immediately. That delay is danger. The heart accelerates, the mind narrows, and choice collapses into instinct. This is the moment when people say things they do not mean, commit to paths they did not intend, and fracture relationships they will later wish they had protected, not because the situation demanded it, but because their inner discipline was absent. The Stoic response to pressure begins with a hard acceptance. Not every feeling deserves a reply. Feelings are events, not orders. They rise from the body, shaped by memory and expectation, and they pass if left alone. The mistake is treating them as commands. When anger appears, the untrained mind asks, "What should I do?" The trained mind asks, "What is this trying to pull me into?" This shift is subtle but decisive. You stop identifying with the emotion and begin relating to it. You stand beside it rather than inside it. This creates distance, and distance creates freedom. There is a temptation, especially among disciplined people, to believe that self-control is about force, about clenching the jaw, suppressing the urge, overpowering the mind. This approach fails over time. It exhausts the will and hardens the spirit. True control is quieter. It is closer to patience than to resistance. When pressure builds, do not rush to calm it. First understand it. Ask what is actually at stake. Often, it is not dignity, safety, or truth, but comfort. The discomfort of being misunderstood. The discomfort of waiting. The discomfort of not having the last word. These are survivable states. Yet people sacrifice their composure to escape them, as if silence were a threat. Observe how often reaction is driven by the need to be seen a certain way. Competent, strong, right, respected. The desire to protect an image can be stronger than the desire to protect character. This is where many lose themselves. They defend a version of who they think they must be, rather than acting from who they have decided to become. Not reacting does not mean withdrawing from life. It means choosing the moment and manner of engagement. A disciplined response is not slower because it is weak. It is slower because it is accurate. It arrives after the mind has cleared and the ego has been set aside. There will be moments when silence feels like defeat, when others speak over you, misinterpret you, or assume your restraint is indifference or submission. This is one of the hardest tests. The instinct to correct the record, to assert oneself, is powerful. But ask yourself what truly corrects a false impression, a sharp response in the heat of emotion, or consistent behavior over time. Reputation formed through reaction is unstable. Reputation formed through conduct endures. Those who learn this early suffer less later. Those who learn it late pay a higher price. Pressure also reveals how little control we have over others. You cannot dictate their moods, their fairness, their awareness. You can influence them, but you cannot command them. The attempt to do so through reaction only deepens frustration. The Stoic approach is to invest fully in what remains within reach, intention, judgment, and action chosen in clarity. This requires trust in process. Trust that you do not need to resolve everything immediately, that some misunderstandings dissolve on their own. That time often reveals what argument obscures. This trust is not passive. It is grounded in experience, in noticing how often problems shrink when not inflated by emotional energy. The second rule that emerges naturally from this understanding is restraint in interpretation. When something happens, the mind rushes to explain it. They disrespected me. This is unfair. I am being challenged. These stories feel convincing because they align with the emotion already present. But they are often incomplete. To react based on them is to build action on assumption. A disciplined person delays judgment, not indefinitely, but long enough to let facts surface, long enough to separate what happened from what was imagined. This delay is not weakness. It is precision. As you practice this, you may notice an unexpected consequence. Pressure loses some of its intensity, not because circumstances improve, but because the mind is no longer amplifying them. What once felt urgent now feels manageable. What once felt personal now feels contextual. This is the beginning of emotional endurance. Not the absence of feeling, but the ability to carry feeling without being bent by it. It is here that calm stops being a technique and starts becoming a trait. And yet, this calm is fragile in its early stages. It must be protected, tested, and reinforced. The next part of this reflection turns inward toward the source of most reactions, not the world, but the expectations we carry into it. The expectations are quiet architects of reaction. They shape how we interpret events long before those events arrive. When reality aligns with them, we move easily. When it does not, tension appears, and with it the impulse to respond. Many believe their reactions are caused by what happened. More often they are caused by what they thought would happen. You expect respect, and someone speaks carelessly. You expect efficiency, and things move slowly. You expect recognition, and it does not come. The event itself is neutral. The friction comes from the gap between expectation and outcome. This gap is where pressure lives. Most people are unaware of how many expectations they carry. They move through the day with a silent list of how others should behave, how situations should unfold, how quickly problems should resolve. When these unspoken agreements are broken, irritation follows. The reaction feels justified, even necessary. But the source of the disturbance remains hidden. The disciplined mind brings expectations into the open. It examines them not to eliminate ambition or standards, but to separate what is reasonable from what is assumed. This examination alone reduces reactivity. When you see an expectation clearly, you are less surprised when it is unmet. Surprise fuels reaction. Familiarity softens it. There is a deeper layer here, one that requires honesty. Many expectations are not about outcomes, but about control. We expect the world to move in ways that confirm our importance, our effort, our narrative of how things should be. When it does not, the reaction is not only frustration, but injury. The ego feels challenged. Not reacting in these moments is especially difficult because it feels like allowing a false story to stand. Yet reacting often strengthens that story. It centers the moment around you, your feelings, your demand for alignment. Silence, in contrast, shifts the center away from ego and back to reality. This does not mean abandoning boundaries. Boundaries are deliberate, reactions are impulsive. A boundary can be stated calmly, without heat, without urgency. Reaction cannot. Learning the difference changes how you move through conflict. Expectations also distort time. Under pressure, we want resolution now. We want acknowledgement now. We want relief now. This urgency compresses judgment. It convinces us that waiting is loss. In truth, waiting is often protection. There is a strength in allowing time to pass before responding. Time reveals patterns, it cools emotion. It exposes whether something is a moment or a trend. Many conflicts are temporary. Reacting to them as if they are permanent gives them weight they do not deserve. The Stoic does not demand that the present conform to desire. They ask what the present requires of character. This question reframes pressure. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" you ask, "Who do I need to be here?" The answer is rarely found in reaction. Consider how often reaction is an attempt to restore comfort rather than integrity. Comfort wants the feeling to end. Integrity wants the action to align. These two aims frequently conflict. Choosing integrity over comfort is the essence of Stoic strength. This choice becomes clearer when you accept a difficult truth. Not every situation will feel resolved in the moment. Some tensions linger. Some misunderstandings remain. Some efforts go unrecognized. The demand for immediate emotional closure is a modern habit, not a timeless necessity. Learning to carry unresolved moments without reacting to them is a form of maturity. It signals trust in your ability to endure ambiguity. It also signals confidence that you do not need constant validation to remain steady. As expectations loosen, attention sharpens. You begin to see what is actually happening rather than what you hoped would happen. This clarity improves decision-making. It also reduces unnecessary conflict. Many arguments begin not with harm, but with disappointment disguised as accusation. The practice here is simple but not easy. Before reacting, ask what expectation was just violated. Ask whether that expectation was stated reasonable and within your control. Often it was none of these. This question creates pause. Pause creates choice. Over time, this habit reshapes how pressure feels in the body. The immediate surge becomes less overwhelming. The mind stays open longer. You respond from understanding rather than impulse. Yet even with adjusted expectations, reaction still arises, because expectations are not the only source. Beneath them lies something more fundamental, the way we speak to ourselves under pressure. That inner dialogue, often unnoticed, directs behavior more powerfully than any external event. That is where we turn next. Long before a reaction reaches the outside world, it forms as language within the mind. A sentence, often brief and absolute, appears. This is unacceptable. I can't let this go. They're wrong. I'm being disrespected. These words pass so quickly they feel like facts, but they are interpretations, and they matter more than the event itself. The inner voice under pressure is rarely calm. It is sharp, urgent, and persuasive. It does not ask permission. It declares. If left unexamined, it pushes the body toward action before reason has time to arrive. Many people believe they react because they feel strongly. More often, they react because they believe the first thing they tell themselves. This internal speech is shaped by habit. Years of responding in similar ways to similar triggers have trained the mind to reach for the same phrases. The mind under pressure prefers familiarity over accuracy. It would rather repeat an old explanation than pause to find a better one. The Stoic discipline here is not to silence the inner voice, but to question it, not aggressively, not with force, but with calm curiosity. When the thought appears this is an attack, ask what evidence supports it. When the thought insists, they always do this, ask whether that is true. When the thought demands you must respond, now ask, what would actually happen if you did not? This questioning creates space. Not a void, but a clearing. In that clearing, the emotion loses some of its certainty. It is no longer reinforced by language that inflames it. The mind begins to slow, not because the pressure has disappeared, but because it is no longer being fueled. Inner speech also reveals values. What you say to yourself in difficult moments exposes what you care about most. Status, control, fairness, recognition. There is nothing wrong with these values. The issue arises when they operate unconsciously, dictating behavior without reflection. For example, if the inner voice says, "I look weak if I don't respond," the reaction that follows is about image, not necessity. If it says, "This shouldn't be this hard," the reaction may be frustration with reality itself. By listening closely, you begin to see the hidden priorities driving your actions. Not reacting gives you time to choose which values deserve expression in that moment. It allows you to ask whether defending an image aligns with the kind of person you intend to be. Often, it does not. There is also a deeper layer to inner speech, one that surfaces under sustained pressure. It is the voice that speaks about you. "I always mess this up. I'm not cut out for this. I can't handle this." These thoughts feel personal because they use your name, your history, but they are still thoughts, not truths. Reacting from this place compounds difficulty. The situation becomes not just challenging but a verdict on your worth. The impulse to react then becomes an attempt to escape self-judgment rather than address the external problem. The Stoic approach is to refuse this collapse of situation into identity. What is happening is not who you are. Pressure tests skills and judgment, not value. Keeping this distinction intact is essential to calm. This is why disciplined inner speech matters even when no one else can hear it. It shapes posture, tone, and timing. It determines whether you act from steadiness or defensiveness. Over time, it becomes the difference between a person who appears composed and one who is composed. Training this voice is not a one-time effort. It is a practice repeated in small moments. Each time you notice an exaggerated or absolute thought and choose not to follow it, you weaken its hold. Each time you replace urgency with observation, you strengthen clarity. You may notice resistance to this practice. The mind may argue that questioning thoughts makes you indecisive or passive. This is another thought, and it too can be questioned. Decisiveness born from clarity is faster and more effective than decisiveness born from panic. As inner speech becomes more measured, reactions lose momentum. The body still responds to pressure, but it no longer rushes ahead of judgment. You begin to feel the difference between energy and agitation. One supports action, the other distorts it. This internal shift prepares you for something more demanding. There will be moments when pressure comes not from confusion or misunderstanding, but from direct provocation. When someone intends to disrupt your calm, when restraint feels like surrender, how to remain steady then requires another layer of strength, one built on understanding power itself. Provocation changes the tone of pressure. It feels sharper, more personal. There is the sense of being tested, challenged, sometimes even baited. In these moments, not reacting can feel unnatural, as if restraint were a denial of self-respect. The instinct is to respond in kind, to meet force with force, to prove something immediately. This instinct misunderstands where power resides. True power is not loud. It does not announce itself in the moment of challenge. It reveals itself in control over outcome, not control over volume. When someone provokes you, they are attempting to draw you into their rhythm, their timing, their emotional terrain. Reacting gives them exactly what they want, influence. Not reacting breaks the exchange. It denies the provocateur feedback. It removes the reward of reaction. This can feel uncomfortable at first because it disrupts familiar patterns of dominance and defense. But it is precisely this disruption that restores balance. There is an important distinction to make here. Silence is not always strength. Sometimes it is avoidance. The difference lies in intention. Avoidance is driven by fear. Discipline is driven by choice. One retreats from discomfort. The other stands steady within it. When provoked, ask what the response would serve. Would it clarify truth or escalate tension? Would it protect a boundary or satisfy pride? Would it improve the situation or merely express feeling? These questions cut through impulse. They reframe the moment from personal to practical. Provocation often exploits a need to be seen as strong. It challenges identity rather than reality. The Stoic does not rush to defend identity. Identity grounded in principle does not require constant reinforcement. It shows itself through consistency. There is also a strategic dimension to restraint. When you react immediately, you reveal your triggers. You teach others how to move you. When you remain calm, you obscure those levers. This does not mean becoming distant or unreadable. It means becoming selective. Under pressure, many confuse speed with effectiveness. They believe the fastest response is the strongest. In truth, speed often benefits the one who initiates the conflict. Delay shifts advantage. It allows emotion to dissipate and intention to surface. You may notice that when you do not react, the provocateur often escalates. This is a test. The absence of reaction removes their sense of control, and they attempt to regain it. This is not a signal to respond, but evidence that restraint is working. Holding your ground without reacting requires presence. Not passive presence, but alertness. You observe tone, context, and consequence. You prepare to act, but you do not rush. This readiness without haste is a hallmark of strength. There is also an internal provocation that deserves attention, the one that comes from comparison, seeing others praised while you are overlooked, watching shortcuts rewarded while you labor patiently. These moments provoke a quieter, more corrosive reaction: resentment. Resentment feeds on the belief that fairness is immediate and visible. When this belief goes unexamined, reaction follows: withdrawal, bitterness, sharpness. Not reacting here means returning focus to your own standards. It means measuring success by integrity rather than outcome. This is difficult because resentment feels justified. It presents itself as moral awareness, but it drains energy and clouds judgment. The Stoic recognizes it as another form of provocation, one that invites reaction without offering resolution. By not reacting, you reclaim authorship of your behavior. You choose action based on principle rather than pressure. Over time, this choice accumulates. Others may not always understand it, but they will feel it. Calm becomes associated with you. Reliability follows. This does not make you untouchable. You will still feel irritation, disappointment, and anger. The difference is that these feelings will no longer dictate your conduct. You will carry them without broadcasting them. This capacity is tested most severely not in public conflict, but in moments of isolation, when no one is watching, when fatigue sets in, when recognition is absent, where discipline feels invisible. To remain steady then requires a different kind of resolve, one rooted in purpose rather than reaction. That is where we turn next. There comes a point when restraint is no longer challenged by others, but by oneself. The noise fades, the provocations pass. What remains is the quiet weight of effort without applause. This is where many abandon discipline, not because they are overwhelmed, but because they are unseen. In solitude, reaction takes a subtler form. It appears as self-indulgence, as justification, as the soft voice that says you've done enough, you deserve a break. No one would notice if you let this slide. These thoughts do not feel aggressive, they feel reasonable. That is why they are dangerous. The pressure here is not external, it is internal resistance to sustained effort. The mind seeks relief not through expression but through permission. Not reacting in this context means refusing to negotiate with comfort when principle has already decided. This is where Stoic strength becomes private. No audience, no immediate consequence. Only the self and its commitments. Discipline practiced here shapes character more deeply than any public display. It builds a reliability that does not depend on recognition. Fatigue amplifies reactivity. When the body is tired, the mind lowers its standards. It frames shortcuts as efficiency. It reframes neglect as balance. This is not dishonesty, it is exhaustion. But exhaustion does not excuse abandonment of direction. The disciplined response to fatigue is not harshness but clarity. To distinguish between rest and retreat. Rest restores capacity. Retreat erodes resolve. The difference lies in intention. Rest is chosen deliberately. Retreat is chosen reactively. This distinction matters because many people react to fatigue by abandoning structure entirely. They stop practices that anchor them: reflection, order, restraint, and call it recovery. What follows is often not renewal, but drift. The return to discipline then feels heavier than the original effort. Not reacting here means maintaining minimum standards even when energy is low. Not excellence, but consistency. You show up in small ways. You keep promises that require little effort but reinforce identity. This steadiness prevents collapse. There is also a deeper discomfort that emerges in isolation, doubt. Doubt about direction, about worth, about whether the discipline is meaningful. These doubts provoke a desire to escape, to distract, to numb, to abandon the path quietly. The Stoic does not argue with doubt emotionally. They acknowledge it without granting it authority. Doubt is a signal to review, not a command to quit. Reaction treats doubt as verdict. Discipline treats it as data. Silence plays a role here. In a world saturated with noise, silence can feel unsettling. Without constant input, the mind confronts itself. Unprocessed thoughts surface. Emotions that were postponed demand attention. Many react to this by filling every gap with stimulation. Choosing not to react to this discomfort, to remain in silence long enough to observe it, is a form of courage. It allows insight to emerge. It reveals which pressures are real and which are manufactured by avoidance. Over time, this practice changes how you relate to effort. Effort becomes less dramatic, less charged. It becomes something you engage with, not something you battle. Reaction thrives on drama. Discipline prefers rhythm. This rhythm carries you through periods when motivation is absent. You act not because you feel compelled, but because you have decided. This decision, repeated quietly, builds a self-trust that does not waver with mood. As this self-trust grows, pressure loses its grip. You no longer need constant reassurance. You are less tempted by immediate relief. You begin to experience a steadiness that feels earned rather than imposed. Yet life does not remain internal. The world returns with its demands, its conflicts, its unpredictability. The discipline formed in solitude must now meet complexity. Not reacting in simple conditions is one thing. Applying it when stakes are high is another. That transition demands judgment, not just restraint. When stakes rise, restraint alone is no longer enough. Judgment becomes essential. High-pressure situations compress time and narrow options. Decisions carry consequences that extend beyond the moment. In these conditions, not reacting must be paired with discernment, or it risks becoming paralysis. The disciplined mind does not equate calm with inaction. Calm is the condition that allows correct action. Without it, decisions are distorted by fear, urgency, or the desire to escape discomfort. With it, even difficult choices can be made without unnecessary harm. Under pressure, the mind tends to simplify. It reduces complex situations into binary choices: act or lose, speak or submit, fight or flee. These false dilemmas provoke reaction. Judgment reintroduces nuance. It recognizes that there are often more paths available than the mind initially presents. To cultivate judgment, one must slow perception, not action. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. Slowing perception means taking in more information before deciding. Slowing action means delaying unnecessarily. The Stoic aims for the former, not the latter. In practice, this means training yourself to ask one question before responding in high-stakes moments. What outcome am I responsible for here? Not what feels fair. Not what feels satisfying, but what actually lies within your role and influence. This question anchors action in responsibility rather than emotion. It narrows focus to what can be shaped. Everything else, others' reactions, external judgments, long-term interpretations, falls outside immediate control and therefore outside the center of concern. There is also a discipline in recognizing when action is required and when restraint remains the better course. Not every pressure demands response. Some demand endurance. The difficulty lies in telling the difference. Experience sharpens this distinction. You learn which situations deteriorate if ignored and which resolve if left alone. You learn where silence protects and where it invites harm. This learning is gradual. It cannot be rushed or outsourced. What can be practiced is reflection after the fact. When you act under pressure, revisit the decision later without judgment. Ask what information you had, what you assumed, and what you might notice next time. This strengthens future judgment without undermining present confidence. High-stakes environments also expose the limits of preparation. No amount of discipline eliminates uncertainty. The Stoic does not seek certainty, but readiness. Readiness is the ability to adapt without losing composure. This adaptability depends on clarity of values. When values are vague, pressure confuses. When values are clear, pressure clarifies. You may still face difficult trade-offs, but you will know what you are trading and why. Not reacting helps preserve this clarity. Reaction narrows values to the immediate emotion. Judgment expands them to include long-term consequence. The choice between these two often defines character. There is a risk here worth noting. As calm becomes habitual, others may lean on it. They may expect you to absorb chaos without response, to stabilize situations they destabilize. This can lead to quiet overload if boundaries are not maintained. Judgment includes recognizing when calm must be paired with firm action. A boundary stated clearly and without heat is still a boundary. Not reacting does not mean tolerating what erodes integrity or effectiveness. It means addressing it deliberately. This balance is delicate. Too much restraint becomes passivity. Too much action becomes reactivity. The middle path is not static. It adjusts to context. It requires attention, not rules. As you practice this balance, pressure becomes less intimidating, not because it weakens, but because you become more capable. You trust your ability to remain composed long enough to see clearly and decisive enough to act when required. This trust changes how you enter demanding situations. You are less guarded, less tense. You know that even if pressure rises, you will not be forced into haste. You will not be driven into reaction. And yet, there is one domain where pressure tests us most relentlessly: relationships. Here, emotion is closest to identity and reaction feels most justified. To remain calm under relational pressure requires a deeper application of everything we have explored. Relationships bring pressure into the most sensitive parts of the mind. Here, reactions are rarely abstract, they are personal. Words carry history. Silence carries meaning. The desire to be understood, valued, and trusted intensifies emotion and shortens patience. What might be manageable elsewhere becomes volatile here. In close relationships, reaction often disguises itself as honesty. People say, "I'm just being real," when in fact they are releasing emotion without regard for impact. Honesty without discipline is not clarity. It is discharge. It may feel relieving in the moment, but it often leaves damage that requires far more effort to repair. Not reacting in relationships does not mean withholding truth. It means choosing the right time, tone, and intention for it. Truth delivered under pressure often arrives sharpened by emotion. Truth delivered with calm has a chance to be heard. One of the most difficult pressures in relationships is misunderstanding. Being seen incorrectly by someone whose opinion matters can provoke an immediate need to correct the image. The impulse is strong because identity feels at stake. Yet immediate correction often reinforces the misunderstanding by introducing defensiveness. Restraint here requires trust. Trust that consistency will clarify more than argument. Trust that one moment does not define the relationship. Trust that silence now may allow dialogue later. There is also the pressure of expectation within relationships. Unspoken assumptions about roles, support, timing, and attention create friction when unmet. Reaction emerges as accusation or withdrawal. The disciplined response is to surface expectations deliberately, not emotionally. This requires patience. It requires wait until the emotional charge has passed so that conversation can be grounded in understanding rather than demand. Not reacting preserves the conditions for this kind of conversation. Conflict, when it arises, tests the balance between firmness and calm. Reacting may feel like self-protection. In reality, it often escalates threat. Calm firmness, by contrast, establishes safety. It signals that boundaries exist, but they are not enforced through aggression. There is a misconception that calm gives the other person power. In fact, calm reclaims power. It prevents the conflict from dictating the terms of engagement. It allows you to decide how and when to respond. Relationships also reveal a quieter form of pressure, the urge to rescue. Seeing someone struggle, suffer, or make repeated mistakes can provoke impatience or control. Reaction here may appear as advice given too forcefully, support offered too urgently, or boundaries crossed in the name of care. Not reacting in this context means respecting autonomy. It means allowing others to move at their own pace, even when it is uncomfortable to watch. This restraint protects both parties. It preserves dignity and prevents resentment. Emotional endurance in relationships is built through listening more than speaking. Listening without preparing a response, without correcting, without defending. This kind of listening requires not reacting internally as well as externally. It is demanding. It asks you to remain open in the presence of discomfort. Over time, this changes the quality of connection. Others feel less pressured to perform, to justify, to defend. Conversations deepen. Trust grows. Calm becomes contagious. There will still be moments when reaction seems unavoidable, when pain is acute, when stakes feel immediate. The Stoic does not expect perfection. They expect recovery. When reaction occurs, they return to discipline without self-punishment. This return matters. It prevents a single lapse from becoming a pattern. It reinforces identity as someone committed to steadiness, not someone defined by momentary emotion. As relationships stabilize under this approach, something unexpected happens. External pressures lose some of their force. Support systems strengthen. The mind feels less isolated under strain. Yet even with strong relationships, pressure remains. Life continues to test. Circumstances change. Loss, uncertainty, and unpredictability persist. The calm cultivated so far must now confront what cannot be negotiated or delayed. This is where acceptance becomes essential. Relationships bring pressure into the most sensitive parts of the mind. Here, reactions are rarely abstract. They are personal. Words carry history. Silence carries meaning. The desire to be understood, valued, and trusted intensifies emotion and shortens patience. What might be manageable elsewhere becomes volatile here. In close relationships, reaction often disguises itself as honesty. People say they are simply being real, when in truth they are releasing emotion without regard for consequence. Honesty without discipline is not clarity, it is discharge. It may feel relieving in the moment, but it often leaves damage that demands far more effort to repair than restraint ever would. Not reacting in relationships does not mean withholding truth. It means choosing the moment when truth can be heard without distortion. Timing matters. Tone matters. Intention matters. Words delivered under pressure arrive sharpened by emotion. Words delivered with calm arrive with space for understanding. One of the most difficult pressures in relationships is misunderstanding. Being seen incorrectly by someone whose opinion matters can feel like an attack on identity. The instinct to correct immediately is powerful, but immediate correction often deepens the misunderstanding by adding defensiveness to the exchange. Restraint here requires trust. Trust that character reveals itself over time. Trust that consistency speaks louder than a single explanation. Trust that silence now may protect the possibility of clarity later. Expectations also operate quietly within relationships. Assumptions about support, availability, loyalty, and effort are often left unspoken. When they go unmet, frustration emerges as reaction. Accusation or withdrawal follows. The disciplined response is not emotional confrontation but deliberate communication. This requires patience. It requires waiting until emotion has settled enough for understanding to replace urgency. Not reacting preserves the conditions for this kind of dialogue. Reaction destroys them. Conflict tests the balance between firmness and calm. Many believe firmness requires intensity. It does not. A boundary expressed without agitation is often stronger than one enforced through emotion. Calm firmness establishes safety. It signals that limits exist without threatening the relationship itself. There is a common fear that calm gives the other person power. In reality, calm reclaims power. It prevents the conflict from setting the pace. It keeps the exchange within your chosen terms rather than emotional reflex. Relationships also present the pressure to rescue. Seeing someone struggle can provoke urgency. Advice is given too quickly. Control is disguised as care. Boundaries are crossed with good intentions. Reaction here may feel generous, but it often creates dependence or resentment. Not reacting in this context means respecting autonomy. It means allowing others to experience the consequences of their choices without interference. This restraint is uncomfortable, but it preserves dignity on both sides. Emotional endurance in relationships is built through listening. Not the kind of listening that waits for a turn to speak, but the kind that remains present without preparing defense or correction. This listening demands inner restraint. It requires you not to react even internally. Over time, this changes the atmosphere of connection. Conversations slow, defensiveness softens, trust deepens. Calm becomes something others feel when they are with you. There will be moments when reaction still occurs. Pain makes discipline harder. The Stoic does not expect perfection. They expect recovery. When restraint fails, they return to it without self-condemnation. This return is crucial. It prevents a single lapse from becoming identity. It reinforces commitment to steadiness rather than emotional dominance. As relationships stabilize under this discipline, external pressures lose some of their intensity. The mind feels less isolated under strain. Support becomes real rather than reactive. Yet no amount of relational strength removes life's deeper pressures. Loss arrives. Uncertainty persists. Events unfold that cannot be negotiated, corrected, or delayed. To remain calm here requires something more fundamental than control. It requires acceptance. Acceptance is the final test of restraint. It is not resignation, nor is it surrender. It is a quiet acknowledgement of what cannot be changed, paired with deliberate attention to what can. Life will continue to deliver events outside your influence: illness, loss, betrayal, unpredictability. To react to these as though they are personal affronts is to hand away your peace. To accept them is to reclaim it. Acceptance begins with observation. You notice the situation clearly, without exaggeration or embellishment. You see what is within reach and what is not. You stop fighting the current of reality itself. This does not mean inaction. It means directing energy toward areas where action matters and letting the rest exist without resistance. Pressure often arrives dressed in inevitability. It whispers that suffering is permanent, that circumstance defines you, that failure is imminent. The reactive mind swallows this narrative whole. The disciplined mind recognizes it as one story among many and refuses to obey it without examination. Acceptance carries an inner paradox. It requires courage to face what is unpleasant, but it also demands humility to admit what is beyond control. Most people evade one or both, creating frantic activity to mask helplessness. The Stoic embraces both, standing steady while circumstances unfold. There is also a temporal dimension. Pressure often convinces us that outcomes are immediate. We must act, decide, or respond now, as if time itself were our enemy. Acceptance reshapes this perception. It allows patience to enter, making space for clarity and endurance. Some problems resolve themselves, some require careful planning, and some simply exist. None of them require frantic reaction. This practice transforms emotional life. Anger, fear, and anxiety no longer dictate behavior because they are understood as transient. Grief is experienced fully, but it does not consume judgment. Disappointment is acknowledged without bitterness. In each case, acceptance acts as a stabilizing lens, preventing the mind from being pulled in every direction by circumstance. Acceptance also reinforces previous disciplines: restraint, clarity of judgment, calibrated action, and relational composure. When you accept what is outside your control, you free your attention for what is within it. Your inner speech quiets, your expectations adjust, your impulses lose authority. Calm becomes less effortful because it is aligned with reality rather than imposed against it. Yet acceptance is not passive patience. It is active engagement with reality on terms you can influence. It does not mean tolerating injustice or neglecting responsibility. It means acting where meaningful action exists and releasing attachment to outcomes that cannot be shaped. This subtle distinction is the cornerstone of enduring strength. Pressure persists even under acceptance, but it no longer destabilizes. You respond from a grounded place, aware of limits, guided by principle, free from compulsion. Your attention becomes sharper. Your energy becomes directed. Your presence becomes steady. This is the culmination of restraint in high-stakes relationships, solitude, and internal struggle. Finally, acceptance is liberating because it reveals the transience of everything external: reputation, wealth, recognition, comfort, even life itself. These are not guarantees, and treating them as if they were only increases suffering. Calm rooted in acceptance is not dependent on the stability of circumstance, it rests in the steadfastness of character. At this stage, the mind is no longer moved merely by external pressure. It is tested by internal reflection, by the subtle choices that define identity and resilience. Every situation, however difficult, becomes an opportunity to practice the disciplined art of not reacting. Every challenge becomes a mirror in which steadiness is both tested and reinforced. In the final part, we bring together all these threads: restraint, observation, judgment, relational composure, solitude, and acceptance in a coherent philosophy that can guide daily life, not as abstract theory, but as lived practice. Now, we arrive at the final synthesis. The journey of restraint, judgment, observation, and acceptance converges into a single principle: the mind governs the self, not circumstance. Each practice pausing before reaction, examining expectations, moderating inner speech, balancing firmness with calm, enduring solitude, navigating relationships, and embracing acceptance builds layers of resilience that reinforce one another. The result is not perfection, but reliability. Not detachment from life, but mastery within it. In daily existence, pressure will continue to arise. A difficult conversation at work, a misunderstanding with a friend, a sudden setback, the weight of unmet expectation. These are inevitable. The reactive mind treats them as emergencies. The disciplined mind treats them as exercises in presence. Each moment becomes a test, and each test is an opportunity to reinforce steadiness. The strength of not reacting is cumulative. It is built in small moments repeated consistently. One silent observation, one deliberate pause, one measured word or withheld comment accumulates over time into a temperament that is hard to unsettle. Others may not recognize it immediately, but they feel it. Steadiness influences environment quietly yet powerfully, shaping interactions without force. Yet the greatest benefit is internal. You reclaim authority over attention, emotion, and choice. Pressure no longer hijacks energy. Irritation does not automatically become expression. Anger may arise, but it does not command. The mind becomes a container rather than a conduit. Within this container, decisions are made with clarity, actions with intention, and conduct aligns with principle rather than impulse. To cultivate this strength, revisit the practices consistently. Observe before responding. Examine assumptions and expectations. Listen to inner speech and question its authority. Balance firmness with calm. Endure fatigue and isolation. Navigate relationships with patience and integrity. accept what cannot be changed while acting decisively where influence exists. Each step reinforces the next, creating a resilient and coherent approach to life. It is worth remembering that this is not a quick path. Pressure is relentless and subtle. Reactions are habitual. The first attempts at restraint may feel awkward or even counterproductive. Persistence is required. Over time, however, the mind internalizes these disciplines, and calm becomes a default, not a struggle. This practice also carries quiet ethical weight. By not reacting impulsively, you reduce harm to others and yourself. You prevent conflict from escalating unnecessarily. You communicate more effectively. You build relationships based on understanding rather than reflex. In short, discipline enhances not just personal peace, but the quality of your life and your influence in the world. Finally, remember that this is a personal endeavor. No one else can do it for you. External validation may lag and challenges will continue to arise. Success is measured not by the absence of pressure, but by the steady application of principle under it. In this way, calm under pressure is both an art and a discipline, a daily commitment to act from clarity, not compulsion. Take a moment now to reflect. Where in your life are you reacting before observation? Which assumptions push you toward immediate expression instead of deliberate choice? Which pressures have authority over your mind that they should not? Begin by noticing these moments and pausing before responding. Build from there. Every day offers an opportunity to practice. Every interaction, every difficulty, every delay, every slight, every challenge, these are the laboratories of discipline. Step into them deliberately. Observe, reflect, and choose. Over time, this commitment transforms not only your reactions, but your entire approach to life. If you carry this forward, your mind becomes steady, your character resilient, and your presence calm regardless of what life places in front of you. Practice this quietly, persistently, and without expectation. Let discipline itself be its own reward. Reflect on these lessons, return to them often, and continue building the strength of restraint. Your peace, focus, and clarity are forged in the moments you do not react. And in this practice, you are truly built by Stoicism.